I am so pleased to see so many of my descendants gathered here today. I am Anna Knight DeMill. My parents are Joseph and Polly Peck Knight. I was born March 5, 1804 in Halifax, Windham County, Vermont. I am the fourth of 7 children. My parents came from Pilgrim and Puritan ancestors. I grew up hearing my parents talk about how my grandfather, Benjamin Knight, fought in the Revolutionary War. In 1810, when I was 6 years old, our family moved to Colesville in Broome County, New York. Father bought a large tract of land that went from a small lake down to the Susquehanna River. It had a stream running through it on which he built a grist mill and 2 carding machines. He eventually bought 3 other farms and hired many hands. I met a fine young man in Colesville named Freeborn DeMill. We were married when I was 15 and he was 24. My husband farmed like most men in those days. We lived in a nice home and enjoyed being close to our relatives. There we had our first 4 children: Mariah, Orpha, Laura Ann, and Oliver. It was during this time that Joseph Smith worked for my father and lived at my parents' home. We became well acquainted with him. Joseph was the best hired hand that my father ever had. Joseph told my father about his revelations and that he was going to receive gold plates to translate. Other than his own family, my extended family was the first to believe the prophet. Father was so interested in the prophet's work that when the time arrived for Joseph to receive the plates, Father traveled to the Smith home. During the night, Joseph and Emma borrowed my father's horse and carriage and drove to the hill to get the plates. Joseph knew that unprincipled men were watching for him to go to the hill and cause him trouble. Providentially, he was not recognized in a strange vehicle. During the time that Joseph and Emma lived at a house close to her parents and Joseph was translating the plates, Father took food, paper, and money to them several times, in order for the work to progress so Joseph didn't need to stop and get work.
My name is Freeborn DeMill. I and my twin brother Garrison were born on March 3, 1795, in Plattekill, Ulster County, New York. My father is Garrett DeMill, who also fought in the Revolutionary War. He was 51 years old when I was born and my mother, Magdalena Amy, was 44. When my family moved to the village of Colesville, New York, I became acquainted with the Joseph Knight family, and I was particularly attracted to his daughter, Anna. We were married March 11, 1819. We purchased land near Anna's parents and established our farm and our family. As Anna has recounted for you, our lives were changed upon meeting Joseph Smith, and we followed with intense interest the progress of the translation of the gold plates. Shortly after, the Church of Christ was organized in Peter Whitmer's home on April 6, 1820, I was baptized in the Susquehanna River by Hiram Smith, and confirmed by Joseph Smith.
I was so pleased when my husband was baptized in September of 1830. I had been baptized earlier, at the same time as Emma Smith, on June 28. You may have heard about the trouble villains caused when our baptism was planned. Newell built a dam in the stream in Father's pasture so that we would have a pond the next morning. But evil men tore out the dam in the night. When we gathered the next morning for the baptism, there was no pond and a mob greeted us. So, we were baptized later. Joseph held meetings at my parents' place and many of our relatives and a few others attended. Many of us were baptized. More than once when Joseph Smith was holding meetings in my parents' home, a mob caught Joseph and took him to jail. Twice Father hired 2 neighbors who were well versed in the law to defend Joseph, and they were able to get him released. Persecution of the prophet and our family increased, and Father discovered that the mob was planning to capture Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and himself. He sent one of my brothers to warn the other 2, and he took Mother and my youngest sister, and they left in the middle of the night with just what they could pack on a horse-drawn sleigh. They met up with the others and arrived in Kirtland, Ohio together.
The prophet Joseph received a revelation in December 1830 that was given specifically for us, the first organized branch of the church in Colesville. This revelation commanded us to leave our homes in New York and assemble together at the Ohio. On April 21, 1831 I, along with my wife Anna, and my family, the oldest, Mariah, being 11 years old and the youngest, Oliver, just 13 months, left Colesville for Ohio. After an arduous journey, we arrived in Thompson, Ohio, near Kirtland, on May 16, 1831.
Our branch of the church consisted of 62 Knight or Peck relatives, and it was under the direction of my brother Newell that we traveled. We were told to leave our property whether we could or couldn't sell it. We were fortunate to sell both of our farms, but it was so sad to lock our door, close the gate, and leave behind our friends, including Freeborn's twin brother Garrison, never to see them again. With our 4 children and what belongings we could take, we joined our relatives to travel to unknown places. Our group had 3 baggage wagons and 11 passenger wagons drawn by oxen. We traveled north to a series of canals and then across Lake Erie. Ice impeded our travels. After almost 6 weeks we arrived in Kirtland. There we agreed to live in a church-supervised cooperative order. After turning in our money to the church, we were assigned to live on a 1,000-acre farm in Thompson, 16 miles from Kirtland. We built fences, planted the fields, and began preparing houses. But our stay was very brief. The land had been donated by Leman Copley, a shaking Quaker who had recently joined the church. But church leaders excommunicated Mr. Copley for bad conduct, and he wanted his property back and demanded that we pay $60 for damages. My brother Joseph said the only damages we did was fitting up his houses and planting his ground. So, we were forced to move. The prophet received a revelation giving instructions for us to settle in the New Zion, which was to be located in Jackson County, Missouri. We made the arduous journey to Missouri, arriving a month later. We settled in Core Township, a few miles from Independence, and the men immediately began building log homes and planting the few crops they could that late in the season. My mother, Polly Peck Knight, had been so sick throughout the journey that Newell carried wood with him so that he could make a coffin for her, if she died on the way. She was very determined to see the land of Zion before she died, and she got her wish, but she died soon after. We were comforted that the prophet Joseph was with us, and he spoke at her funeral. He knew her so well, having lived with my parents for a time. Mother had washed and ironed his clothes, cooked meals for him, and no doubt heated a brick for his feet when he made his trips in our sleigh to Court Emma. Mother was the first Latter-day Saint to die in Missouri, but was not the last. Many people lost loved ones due to the harshness of our living conditions, lack of adequate food, and attacks from mobs. We were saddened when our older sister Esther also died. The following year, my 16-year-old sister Elizabeth also died. In September of the next year I gave birth to our 5th child, Adelia. The winter had been very cold, and until enough log cabins could be built, as many as 10 families had to live in one cabin, which was open and unfinished and had only the frozen ground for a floor. In spite of our circumstances, most of the saints were cheerful and dedicated to their new beliefs. We gathered together in church meetings and rejoiced in the Spirit of the Lord. My father was lonely, so he remarried. His new wife was a widow with 4 children. Her deceased husband was my mother's brother. Father was 61 and Phoebe was 33. They had 2 children while we were going through the trials of the Missouri period. By November, the old settlers had become so bitter and resentful of the saints that mobs started rampaging through Mormon settlements. The church press in Independence was burned. Some of our men were tarred and feathered, and others were killed. The saints were forced to flee to Clay County for safety with only what we could carry. We all suffered great losses. Our family and friends of the Colesville branch camped in the Missouri Bottoms. My brother Newell continued to preside over us. We lived in tents until winter set in, and did our cooking out in the wind and the storms. The season was severe and many families suffered for the lack of necessities of life. We stayed long enough that the men built a church. It was so nice to have a church to meet in. But our peace was only temporary. Because my father and 2 brothers were millers, in each of the places we lived, they found a stream and erected a grist mill so they could grind the grain our men raised, and make flour for the saints. More than once, the mobs drove them away and they had to leave their mill, including the grindstones. Also, during this time, my husband injured his leg in a saw accident. For 5 years he was laid up and could only do a sparse amount of work. This left a burden on me to earn our living the best I could.
In Clay County I severely injured my leg while sawing with a buck saw. I was not able to labor much, and while in this injured state we were again forced to move out of Clay County to far west, in Caldwell County. There, our 6th child, Elias, was born in January of 1838. That July my leg had healed enough that I applied for a land grant of 40 acres. I was unable to do much except provide some shelter for my family for the winter before the mobs came again. In February of 1839 we were driven from the state along with all of the other saints under Governor Boggs' extermination order. We fled across the state of Missouri in snow and ice. We crossed the Mississippi River and found refuge in Quincy, Illinois, where the residents there were most charitable to the many destitute outcasts that thronged the river. I found lodging for my family until we could establish a small farm of about 2 miles northeast of Quincy. It was there that our eldest daughter, Mariah, met Daniel Buckley Funk, a son of a prosperous farmer nearby. They were married April 21, 1841 in our home. Early the next year we moved to the city of Nauvoo.
In early 1842 we bought land in Nauvoo and moved there. On January 8 of 1843 our second daughter, Orpha, was married to Perry DeWayne Davis. A few months later our last child, Lavina Esther, was born on May 13. She was our 7th child. In Nauvoo we managed to get into a house a block north of the temple which was under construction. We were happy to be living in the same city as the prophet Joseph and his brother Hiram, whom we had been so close to in Colesville. It was a privilege to visit with Joseph on the street or in his store. We attended gospel meetings in the Grove and heard him speak. The prophet organized the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo on March 17, 1842. I was able to join at the second meeting. On June 27, 1844, the prophet Joseph and Hiram Smith were murdered. You can only imagine how shocked and saddened we were. Our tender leader and friend was gone as well as his brother. The whole city was in mourning. What was going to become of us and the church? We felt like sheep without a shepherd. A meeting was held wherein Sidney Rigdon stated his claim to a guardianship for the church. Then Brigham Young stood up and explained how the 12 apostles had been given the keys of the priesthood by the prophet so that the church could go on if his life was cut short. Our son Oliver, who was 14, testified that while Brigham Young was talking, his voice changed to the voice of Joseph. His appearance and every motion was that of Joseph, and his language was so convincing and prophetic that it seemed to bring conviction to the hearts of all who were present. The remainder of 1844 and most of 1845 was spent by the saints getting the Nauvoo temple finished so we could all take out our endowments. Both Freeborn and I received ours and we were sealed for time and eternity. It became apparent that we saints would have to leave our homes again and seek yet another place where we could live in peace. We immediately began trying to sell our farm and prepare to leave in the spring. In early 1846, we were finally forced to forget selling and just flee for our lives. Because my husband was crippled, we asked Newell if we could travel along with him, and he agreed. We had but 1 ox and a light wagon. Newell let us put some of our things in one of his wagons. We crossed the river and took our last look at the city we loved and the magnificent temple with its lofty tower raised toward the heavens.
Good afternoon. I'm Mariah DeMill Funk, the oldest child of Anna and Freeborn DeMill. It is so nice to be with you today. My parents have already described for you the wonderful but often traumatic experiences that shaped my childhood. Suffice it to say, that from my 11th birthday onward I experienced tedious journeys, hardships, persecutions, and sorrows. As the oldest daughter, I took on many responsibilities in the home and often cared for my younger siblings. By the time I was 20, we were refugees in the town of Quincy, Illinois, and just beginning to re-establish a measure of comfort among sympathetic people. I discovered that a young man, the son of an industrious farmer near to where we lived, had taken an interest in me. Although he at first found our religious views peculiar, we began a courtship that ended with our marriage in Nauvoo on the 22nd of April, 1841, just prior to my 21st birthday. We were married at Father DeMill's house about 2 miles northeast of Quincy. The next day we moved into the city where Daniel was working by the month. In August we went on to Father Funk's farm 22 miles northeast of Quincy. In January 1842 a fine little daughter was born to us whom we named Sarah Ann. We were heartbroken when following December she died, not yet a year old. Sarah Ann's death, along with the firm testimony I and my family held of the restored gospel, caused my husband to sincerely investigate our beliefs, and in February 1843 Daniel joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, being baptized and confirmed by my brother, Newell Knight. I myself had been baptized at 12 years of age in 1832. On November 7, 1844 a son, William DeMill Funk, was added to our family, and the next spring we bought a lot and built our first little house in the city of Quincy. Here, our son, Ezra Knight Funk, was born on June 1, 1846. That summer we moved to a larger home in another part of the city. We were happy in our new location, but it was not to last, for the hatred toward the Latter-day Saints forced us to leave the state. So the next February, 1847, we again sold our home and cast our lot with the Saints, who were driven from the state of Illinois. Daniel left his mother, brothers, sisters, and extended family behind when he left Quincy, Illinois. My family had already left a year earlier, and we joined them on the westward trail at Mount Pisgah, in the newly created state of Iowa.
I am Oliver DeMill, the fourth child and oldest son of Freeborn and Anna Knight DeMill. I was born March 30, 1830, in Colesville, New York, 7 days previous to the organization of the church in 1830. My childhood memories are filled with both joy and pain, as my family was forced to move multiple times because of our religion. I was 9 years old when I was baptized in Quincy, Illinois, and I received the Holy Ghost. A bright light came over me and I was enveloped as it were by this heavenly light. On our way home we had to cross over a high hill. I walked along just the same as the rest, but it didn't seem to me as if I touched the ground, and this feeling stayed with me all day and until late bedtime. Then the light went up, gradually passing out of sight. We moved to Nauvoo just as I was turning 12, and I would like to add just a few of my personal experiences with the prophet Joseph Smith before continuing with the family story. It was by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost that I knew Joseph Smith was a true prophet of God. I once heard the prophet say, "Men cannot comprehend themselves, let alone comprehend God. And you don't know who I am, or won't know, until you stand before the bar of God." I was present when the prophet was preaching, and he said, "I had a revelation," and commenced to tell it. Just then a flock of geese flew over where the meeting was being held, as it was out of doors where they usually held meetings in summer time. The geese made a quacking sound and most of the people turned their eyes to look. I kept my eyes on the prophet, and Joseph said to them, "If you care more for the quacking of a wild goose than for the revelations of God, I've no more to say to you at present." He sat down and didn't say any more. One day while the Nauvoo Legion was drilling and practicing, a sham battle was instituted in which a conspiracy was planned by John C. Bennett and others to kill the prophet. Several guns were loaded with bullets, and Bennett, who was one of Joseph's aides, told the men with the guns to aim directly at the prophet. It was revealed to the prophet right there and then, and he told Bennett of it right there in my presence, and Bennett soon made his escape, mounted on one of the fastest horses in the Legion. I was 14 years old when the prophet and his brother Hiram were martyred. My mother has already related to you how I attended the meeting wherein Brigham Young was transfigured as Joseph. I testify that his voice changed to the voice of Joseph Smith, his countenance and every appearance and motion was that of Joseph, and his language was so convincing and prophetic that it seemed to bring conviction to the hearts of all who were present. I was in the meeting and saw with my own eyes, and heard with my own ears all that was said and done, and know of a surety whereof I speak. And I lie not. Brigham Young was a true successor to the prophet Joseph Smith and a true prophet of God, and presided over the church in the spirit of his calling for many years, manifesting great wisdom in all his counsel to the people, showing that he was guided by revelation from God. I will now return to the story of our family's struggles. I was just a young child when I was called upon to assist my mother in providing for our family after my father injured himself in a soaring accident in Missouri. I became well acquainted with cold and fatigue through the persecutions of the Missouri mobs. Our family found some relief in Quincy, Illinois, and a measure of peace and great spiritual growth in Nauvoo. I watched our close family ties stretch with the marriage of my two older sisters, Mariah, and then Orpher. My sister Orpher was the first to leave Nauvoo with her husband Perry Juane Davis and their little daughter, Emerette. They slogged through the mud of Iowa and made their way to winter quarters. Our family, along with other members of my grandfather Joseph Knight's family, followed after, leaving Nauvoo on April 22, 1846. By the time we arrived at the way station known as Mount Pisgah on May 26, my father's old injury and an outbreak of fever sores compelled us to stop. What we thought would be a short rest turned into a 4-year settlement as we became part of the Mount Pisgah community that raised crops and provided other assistance to the many wagon trains that passed through on their way to the Salt Lake Valley. That winter we all suffered from the bitter winter weather, the exhaustion and disease, and many died of hunger. We received word that Orpher had died in winter quarters on October 29. Just a few months later we were all devastated when our patriarch, Joseph Knight, my grandfather, also succumbed to the harsh conditions on February 3, 1847. Tragedy continued when my uncle Newell also died that summer while camped with the Ponca Indians in Nebraska Territory. I was now a young man in my late teens and it became my duty to sustain my family. Another year passed and on October 1, 1848 my older sister Laura and married Samuel Kendall Gifford. In 1849, my sister Mariah and her husband Daniel Funk left for the Salt Lake Valley. It would not be until the spring of 1850 before we would leave Mount Pisgah and make our own way there.
Daniel, I and our two young boys, William and Ezra, spent a year at Mount Pisgah. During that year Daniel was ordained an elder by Lorenzo Snow. We bought a house and we raised a good crop which served us well. For the following April we started for the Valley of the Great Salt Lake as part of Brigham Young's company. Daniel was named as an assistant to Captain John Stoker, one of the captains of 50. We were delayed many times on our journey west for the purpose of building bridges and rafts to enable us to cross the streams, but in helping ourselves we were instrumental in helping the other wagon train companies, who had left at a later date and caught up with us. We arrived in Salt Lake Valley, the 21st of September, 1848 and settled 11 miles north of the city. During the fall and winter we built a house and workshop and in the early spring we moved these buildings onto a lot in Salt Lake City. Here another son was born to us, Daniel Buckley Funk, Jr. The next year, in June of 1849, after getting a few acres of wheat and a garden planted, Daniel was asked by Apostle Lorenzo Snow to go back to the Green River, in Wyoming. He was to build a ferry boat in company with George Washington Bradley. They were to ferry the California gold rush seekers across the river for some extra cash. That same year a delegation of Ute Indians under direction of Chief Walker came to Salt Lake requesting that some pioneers come to the Sand Pitch Valley to teach them how to till the soil and build houses. During October conference it was decided to build a new settlement in Sand Pitch Valley and we were called on a mission to help establish it. So once more we left our little home, to go to the frontier. The Indian Chief Walker had promised peaceful cooperation with the people, and President Young took him at his word. On October 28, 1849, we began the trip south to the proposed designation. There were 50 families, comprised of 224 men, women, and children, plus 240 head of cattle. Father Isaac Morley, as he was called, was the leader and Nelson Higgins was captain. We arrived at the location chosen by Father Morley on November 19, 1849, and immediately set to work making shelters for the hard winter the Indians had predicted. We spent the first winter in dugouts. Soon a terrible storm came up, leaving 3 feet of snow. From January 1, 1850, for the space of 3 weeks, it was a ceaseless snowstorm, and the sun shone not. In the spring we battled rattlesnakes and struggled to plant crops in the harsh ground. That summer Brigham Young named our settlement Manti from the Book of Mormon, and a town plat was surveyed. Oh, how different was this rough country from the lush valleys of New York where I was born.
We left Mount Pisgah for the Great Salt Lake Valley in the spring of 1850. We traveled with the Captain Warren foot wagon train. We greatly missed my father Joseph and my brother Newell, who had led us in the past. Our family was now just 6, Freeborn and me, Oliver, Adelia, Elias, and Lavina. The journey across the plains was long and arduous, but the family was greatly blessed and, except for Freeborn's handicap, all managed to complete the journey alive and well. We arrived in the Salt Lake Valley on September 17, 1850, but we only spent a few weeks there to rest and resupply. Our daughter Mariah and her husband Daniel Funk had been called to Manti the year before with the original settlers, and our prophet Brigham Young asked us to join them there. We arrived on the 5th of November, 1850. This was the 8th place we had settled in, since we left our home in Colesville, New York about 20 years ago. Manti would be our home for the rest of our lives. I was 46 years old and Freeborn was 55. Of my parents and their 7 children, only Joseph Jr. and I made it to the valley. Our trials were not over when we reached Manti. We endured many hardships such as famine, trouble with Indians, and the many disadvantages of pioneer life. We were also isolated from the center of the church in Salt Lake City. But as the years progressed, we were able to finally find peace and rest, as well as a measure of comfort as our remaining children married and our family grew. On December 31, 1852, our 5th child, Adelia, married John Pritchard Squire, Manti's first school teacher. Adelia and John made their home in Manti and had a family of 8 children. On May 13, 1855, our oldest son, Oliver, at the age of 25, married Emily Almina Beale. Oliver and Emily had 11 children. Oliver married a second wife, Fidelia Wingett, June 3, 1865, in the Endowment House in Salt Lake City, and they had 7 children. Oliver also married a third wife, Rebecca Jane Allred, the 10th of October 1865, and they had 1 child. On December 11, 1859, our youngest child, Lavina Esther DeMill, married John Alma Beale. Lavina and John had 11 children. They lived in Manti and Glenwood, and they moved to Schonsberg around 1875. Our youngest son Elias married Melvina Wingett, sister of Fidelia, Oliver's second wife. On the 11th of June 1863, at the age of 25. Elias and Melvina made their home in Manti and were the parents of 9 children. We were blessed with 66 grandchildren.
I'm Mariah DeMill Funk, and it has been over 30 years since I told you of our arrival in Manti and the struggles we had that first year. Daniel built us a home 1 block north and 1 west from the lower corner of the public square. I had a large living room, and later I commenced teaching school there. I opened my home to the many church officials on their visits to Manti. Daniel had made the furniture, spinning wheels and reels, and many of our tools and implements. Our daughter Irene Mariah was born on July 26, 1851, and 2 years later Arseneth, and was born on October 20, 1853. My husband was very industrious and active in exploring and developing the natural resources around us. The Indians named him the Squirrel due to his constant activity. He was generally on good terms with them because of his fair dealing, and this added to his prestige with them. Because Daniel was so often in the mountains a great deal of the time, he became interested in prospecting. He experimented with colored clays and could make yellow ochre and vermilion red paints. He took the raw saleratus from the bed southwest of Manti and refined it into baking soda, and also a silica powder for cleaning. For my part, besides the usual sewing I did in those days for my family, I made braided rugs and hooked rugs, which I liked to do so much. I made some beaded gloves and handbags to sell. Our twins were born on September 29, 1856. They were given the names of Aaron and Ammon. On October 15, 1856, Mary Jane Pechtel was sealed to my husband Daniel as a plural wife. Just 3 days later one baby died, and in 3 more days the other one was gone. Oh, what a sorrowful time this was. Oh, many were the trials, great and small, we were called to bear for the gospel's sake. Many times Daniel gave his services to the territory in the defense of its people, and especially in 1857 when he served in Echo Canyon at the time Johnston's army was at our door. He also served on other occasions when danger threatened from without, as well as the ever-present source of danger from within. Yes, it was Indian war times. He had a great influence with the Indians, and was involved in all the wars. On September 7, 1858 our daughter Emret was born. Not all of the Indians were at war. Chief Walker's brother, Chief Arapeen, and his tribe made their winter home in a little valley in the hills 6 miles south of Manti. For some time my husband had realized the need of recreation for the isolated, hard-working people of this area. He had in mind a pleasure resort built around a body of water. He talked to President Brigham Young about this and received his approval and encouragement. With President Young's help with the Indians, Daniel acquired a deed for the property signed by Chief Arapeen. Soon the work on the lake country began. My husband and our boys worked hard to build a large levee at one end of the valley. A ditch along the north side of 6 Mile Canyon was made. The water from the creek was diverted, and it ran into the lake bed, much to the surprise of the Indians, who believed the water would need to run uphill. Daniel's whole time and energy was on his own little world now. Water was carried around the sunny slopes, where groves of trees must grow, and gardens, melons, and even sugarcane thrived. The cane was later milled into a fine grade of molasses. We had water for flowers. I loved the lilacs and roses. Over time we planted thousands of trees. At first we had just a temporary home that was made in the side of the hill to the west. Soon afterwards, 2 homes were built on the crest where the view of the whole countryside was magnificent. Our families were moved to the lake, and we sold our town property. The lake was stocked with fish, and Daniel built rowboats for the coming crowds. He made a willow bowery for gatherings. After some time, a dancing pavilion was made on a broad levee, and another one, still later, a short distance out of the water. When the railroad had reached Manti, a spur was built to the Morrison coal mine a short distance south of the resort. Arrangements were made with the company to run excursions to the lake, and people came from all over central Utah to enjoy picnicking, boating, fishing, and swimming at Funk's Lake. My husband cut and stored ice in the winter, and used the ice to make ice cream to sell in our refreshment stand near the lake. In the winter ice skating and sledding were enjoyed on the lake. With the help of Mr. Miller, Daniel made a steamboat which carried 70 people on pleasure trips on the lake. A sand beach in a secluded spot was provided with lockers and bathing suits so that swimming and bathing were enjoyed. Funk's Lake was a noted pleasure resort, but Daniel constantly planned further improvements. Our last child was born and given the name of Adelia before she died that same day, December 7, 1861. Over the years I corresponded with Daniel's mother and other members of his family, none of whom ever joined the church. I received such interesting letters about their families. They told us about the progress of the Civil War, which people here in Utah knew little about. I also wrote to my cousins in the East, and keep in touch this way. Well, I've rambled on and on. But just let me tell you of a trip my son William and daughter Emret took with me to Dixie. William was 24, and he drove the ox team down and back. Emret was 10 years old. We stayed with my dear sister Laura and family, and brother Oliver and his family. They lived at Shunsburg, and had such fine orchards and vineyards. We enjoyed our visit so much. I will let them tell you more about their lives there.
The year after we arrived in Manti, I partnered with my sister Laura and's husband, Samuel Kendall Gifford, in raising wheat and oats, which brought in enough cash to be able to build 2 rock homes, one for my parents and one for myself. I met and courted Emily Elmina Beale, and we were married by President Brigham Young on May 13, 1855. Emily and I have 11 children, 7 sons and 4 daughters. In the fall of 1861, I, along with my sister Laura and her husband Samuel Gifford, were called to the cotton mission. My sister Lavina Esther and her husband John Almerbeal would be called to join us the next season. I sold all my lands and property, except for the house my parents lived in, and journeyed south with my wife and 3 small children to Washington County, where I found the people there suffering from an epidemic of chills and fevers due to the swampy conditions and mosquitoes around St. George. For the health of my family I looked around and found a nice little valley with a farm owned by an old Indian named Shuns about 45 miles on up the Virgin River. I bought the 73-acre farm from Shuns, paying him a down payment and agreeing to give him food whenever he needed some. My sister Laura and's family and 11 other families joined me there, and we called the community Shunsburg, after the original owner, who continued to live among us until his death. We immediately began planting orchards, grape vineyards, cotton and cane fields, and vegetable gardens. The first 2 houses were 2-room cabins made of cartonwood logs. Fences were also made of cartonwood logs. An irrigation system was built on the Virgin River provided water, as well as Shuns Creek. I was called to be the presiding elder of the Rockville branch, which included our community. On June 3, 1865, I took as a plural wife, Fidelia Wingett. I was fortunate that Emily loved and respected Fidelia and they became lifelong companions. Fidelia had 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. In 1866, at the advice of the authorities, we left our homes at Shunsburg and gathered in nearby Rockville for protection against the rampaging Indians. In 1867 I took a 3rd wife, Rebecca Jane Allred, and by the spring of 1868 I completed a 2-story, rock home on a knoll overlooking Shunsburg. Our family was very glad to leave the tent in Rockville and move back to Shunsburg into a real home. As soon as it was considered safe, over 50 families came to settle in Shunsburg and began the process of building it into a thriving community. Numerous homes, barns, and public buildings were erected. My 3rd wife Jane became discouraged, however, and she left with our little girl for California. My other 2 wives and their children all lived in harmony in our new home. We had many happy times together. I taught my children to be honest, industrious and religious. I must tell you of this encounter I had in the fall of 1869 while I was returning from a trip north to sell produce. I stopped in Beaver and met a man who said he had known a man by the name of DeMill back in Mount Pisgah, Iowa, who had brought his son to buy an ox calf. They had paid for the animal, but for some reason never returned to claim it. I told him that man was my father and I was the son, and the reason we had not returned for the ox was because we had left for the Salt Lake Valley. The man was pleased and exclaimed, "Do you know what I did with that calf? I kept it until it grew to be an ox, and I worked it all the way across the plains and came to the valleys of these mountains. In fact, I wore him out, so I want to pay you for the price of an ox." Whereupon he gave me $50 worth of wheat. On April 6, 1870, my dear sister Laura Ann Gifford passed away. She was buried in the Schonsberg Cemetery by a grief-stricken family, the eldest 21 and the youngest 9.5 months. Samuel's plural wife, Ursula, was a great comfort and blessing to the little family. My sister was a large woman who was good-natured and easygoing. She seldom scolded and never spanked her children, only spoke to them once and expected them to do as they were told without a second reminder. The story is told that at one time Laura Ann had gone on an errand to visit a neighbor who lived on the other side of a small hill. One of the boys either followed or went with her. When they reached the hill, the boy said he would take the trail around the opposite side of the hill and his mother could take the other one and they would see who got there first. When Laura Ann got to their house, the boy had not arrived, so she went to meet him and soon saw the moccasin tracks of an Indian, and her son's tracks ended there. The men were called in from the fields and a search was made of the surrounding mountains. The boy cried so much that some of the Indians wanted to kill him, and some wanted to trade him to other tribes. A council was held and a decision was finally made to return him to his people. The boy's father had a choice horse that the Indians wanted, so it was traded for the young boy, plus a loaf of bread that was baked in a large Dutch oven. There was always room for one more at Laura Ann's table. Brigham Young visited them in Schönsberg several times on his many trips to his winter home in St. George. He often stayed with the Giffords. The story is told that on one visit he mentioned to the branch members that he must visit Sister Gifford because she never failed to find some cool buttermilk for him. There was a special tie between Brigham Young and Laura Ann's husband Samuel, as it was Samuel's father who was instrumental in taking the gospel to Brigham Young. Our family and friends at Schönsberg prospered and our herds of sheep and cattle multiplied. When the animals began to exceed the capacity of the limited grazing area on the hillsides, the watershed was damaged and frequent rains caused large streams to wash away more and more of the fertile soil. As the flooding got worse and worse, the roads often became impassable for days at a time. Many families got discouraged and sold out and moved to Rockville, Springdale, or the new settlement of Hurricane. In 1889, I too gave in to nature and my arthritis, and moved my family to Rockville, where I bought a co-op store. By 1900, Schönsberg had become a ghost town, with no one living there. My sons and sons-in-law bought the land from the settlers, so the valley became all DeMill property again, and my grandsons farmed and ranched there as late as the 1950s.
Hello, I'm Adelia DeMill and I'm very happy to be with you today. I was born September 29, 1832, at Jackson County, Missouri. My parents have already recounted for you the trials of my early childhood. As a young girl I knew the prophet Joseph Smith and I often heard him preach. I was just 11 when he and Hiram were murdered and only 13 when we were forced to flee Nauvoo. I will just tell one incident that occurred during the trek west. Our company arrived at Chimney Rock in Nebraska, and I along with some of the other young folks climbed to the top. While climbing down, the camp started moving. We did some fast traveling to catch up with them. That was the last time we ever left camp. I walked all the way and drove cattle. After arriving in Salt Lake, we were sent to Manti to help settle that part of the country, arriving there November 5, 1850, when I was just a little past 18. My family went to Salt Lake City for the April conference in 1851, and while I was there I met John Pritchard Squire, who was working for Lorenzo Snow, and he was in his work clothes when we met. The first time he called upon me I was washing and I was embarrassed to be seen in my wash day clothes. However, he said he had always wanted to see his future wife on a wash day before he married her, because he felt he could tell if she would be a clean and tidy wife with her work. Elder Snow discharged John October 1, 1852, and he came to Manti to begin teaching school. On the 31st of December 1852 at 4 p.m. I and John were married by John Lowry, Sr., the Bishop of Manti. After our marriage my husband and I lived in a one-room log house which was also the schoolhouse. I rose early in the morning to prepare breakfast and do my early morning chores, and then I helped transform the room into a schoolroom. I would take up the beds and help carry the benches in so John could teach school. At noon the midday meal was prepared and in the afternoon school would continue. After school, the benches were carried out, and the beds made, and the evening meal would be prepared. John and I are the parents of 8 children. 2 died very young. The remainder grew to manhood and womanhood. In addition to my 8, I mothered 3 grandchildren who were left without mothers, Alice Squire, Orson Allen and little Aaron D. Squire, who died very young. I was only 40 years old when my husband John died, leaving me to struggle alone to raise my family and run our small farm. I felt blessed that God had given me the 2 sons, ages 14 and 15, as I surely needed them so badly then. Our dear mother, Anna Knight DeMill, passed away on July 22, 1878 here in Manti, which was a loss we all deeply felt. Just 2 years later our sister Lavina Esther also died on March 3, 1880 in Schönsberg. I will relate the circumstances of her death as they are of a spiritual nature. When our mother Anna died, Lavina was about to have a son, Charles Francis Beale. When she went into labor she very nearly died, but our mother, Anna, came to her and told her, "Lavina, you won't die at this time. You are going to live and have a baby girl. She will be a courageous woman and will work in genealogy." She also told her to go to the temple for her own endowment and sealing. Just over a year later, while pregnant with the promised daughter, Cora Anna, our mother appeared again and told Lavina to prepare clothing, quilts, and bedding for all in the family, for Lavina was to die when the baby came. True enough, Lavina worked hard to prepare everything and completed all her sewing the day before the baby came, after which she left this life. She was 37 years old and had given birth to 11 children. Our father, Freeborn, was the next to pass on the 23rd of January 1881 in Manti. He and our mother Anna are buried together in the Manti Cemetery. Our oldest sister Mariah died March 25, 1889, just 4 months after Daniel died of a sudden heart attack on November 20, 1888, while on the road between Manti and the lake resort. While coming home he met 2 of his grandsons on horses going to Manti. He stopped and talked and laughed with them. He picked up the reins and flipped them over the horses and said, "I must be going." He sank back on the seat. His life was cut short by a heart attack. Both he and Mariah died at the age of 67.
I am Elias DeMill. I was born in Far West, Missouri in 1838, and my early childhood was filled with difficulty, as has been recounted here today. I was but 12 years old when we made the journey to Utah, settling in Manti, where I remained for the rest of my life. My brother Oliver and I helped our father, Freeborn DeMill, clear and work a small farm. After Oliver left, I took on more of the responsibilities. My family endured all the privations incidental to pioneer life. During the grasshopper plague, there were many days when we had nothing but greens to eat. I married Malvina Wingett, daughter of Cyrus Wingett and Catherine Hullett Wingett, on June 12, 1863. Malvina was born in Nauvoo, Illinois, and came to Utah in 1847 in the Charles E. Rich Company. We are the parents of 10 children. I am a farmer and rock cutter. After marrying, I homesteaded some farmland 4 miles south of Manti. I cut much of the stone for the Manti Temple, and I made the headstones for my own father and mother's graves. I was a good hunter, hunting deer, ducks and geese to feed my family or to sell. At one time, I and a companion had killed 18 deer and were taking them to the Pioche mining camps to sell when the Indians saw us and were angry. The Indians said we could kill deer to feed our families but not to sell, that the deer belonged to the Indians and were like their cattle. I served as a sheriff, but at the time sheriffs didn't receive any pay for their services. I rode in several posses to recover stolen animals from the Indians. It once took 3 days for us to catch up to the Indians and recover the animals. Although I was often called upon to pursue the Indians after raids, I felt great compassion for them, and became a very good and trusted friend of the Indians. Often they would come to me with their grievances and we would talk for hours. Throughout my life I tried to be good-natured and even-tempered, and to love my wife and children. I have a firm testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the restoration.
Elias lived to be 67. Before his death he had a bad cough. Rather than expose his family, he had them set up a bed for him in the attic. His children and grandchildren carried his meals to him. He grieved because he had never received the call to fill a mission that was promised in his patriarchal blessing. He didn't realize that his mission had been with the people he lived among, including the Indians and those in the spirit world. He passed away at home July 22, 1905, and was loved by all who knew him. My brother Oliver lived to be 78. Before he died he became very sick and was unconscious for 3 days. When he awoke he reported that he had seen a wonderful vision of the next world. He passed true to the faith on July 8, 1908. I lived to be 85 and remained healthy until the day I died. In fact, I had been knitting the day before I passed on December 20, 1917. We are grateful that you came today to hear our stories and honor our parents. True pioneers and witnesses of the restoration of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.